Hello, citizen or citizens of the world. Welcome to the European Show. It's your new one-stop shop for transcontinental politics, society, and the occasional scandal or scandals. I'm Abby Bella. It's 100 seconds to midnight on the Doomsday Clock, and this is my outsider view of what happened in Europe this week. Let's take a look. This is the patent waiver issue on COVID-19 vaccines. We've had this global move and discussion about how, in a global pandemic, when people are dying, especially in light of the situation that's happening in India, wouldn't it be great to kind of not think about profits for 5 seconds and waiver the patent on the COVID-19 vaccine? There was some pushback from it, but generally what happened is in the European Union context, Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, has expressed that she thinks it's a good idea. There's going to be some more talks on this, but it should go pretty smoothly in terms of waiving the patent. But this is we're talking about more than just the European Union. We're talking about the individual countries in the European Union and also other countries and other important kind of pharma-related countries. And one of those places, of course, is the United States. And President Biden has expressed that he will waive the patent. He's on board. Even though there's a lot of criticism of this patent thing from bad actors, people who want to leave the patent in place, like pharmaceutical companies who control already so much, far too much of our lives in many ways, but also power in different countries, power in terms of lobbying governments around the world. So the pharmaceutical companies were not happy, but Biden's firm on this. Biden's not a progressive, he's not a progressive person. Biden of the Obama administration, the administration that exiled Snowden, that continued with all kinds of war efforts and other things like this. That's Biden, right? But even Biden sees the point of this. Ursula von der Leyen agrees. The European Union is on board. But there's one country that's really important and that's really powerful in the European Union that disagrees. And this is Germany. I have times when I defend Angela Merkel because she gets a lot of unfair criticism, but she also gets a lot of fair criticism. And this is Angela Merkel coming out at her worst. Angela Merkel, and hear me out because she actually makes a good point, but the overall ethos of what she's trying to say is just evil and wrong and such a bad look, so bad. So basically, Merkel came out and speaking at a meeting at the European Commission. She has said, in terms of waiving the patent, she said no. She doesn't want to do it. It's a bad idea. The patents should stay in place, and she gave several reasons for it. We'll start with the good reasons. So she said that's not going to do a lot. It's just going to be a lot of talks and long negotiations again for everyone to get on board, and then it's not going to be effective because you still have to actually produce those vaccines and deliver them to the people who need it. So she said, rather than do this show, why don't we just actually get together and produce more and make sure that everyone gets their fair share. And then she said, what different countries need to do is simply send more out. They need to share what they have with the rest of the world, specifically talking about India. The European Union has been sharing a lot of its vaccines, I think far more than any other Western power. Correct me if I'm wrong, but certainly the United Kingdom isn't doing anything. And the European Union definitely has. They came very close to banning exports of vaccines a few months back when there was this crisis with AstraZeneca and they didn't get the amount of vaccines they had ordered. So there was this big crisis in the European Union over vaccinations. But, countries like the post-Brexit United Kingdom have no qualms about keeping everything to themselves and not keeping it open. But the European Union didn't end up doing the ban. They're still sharing a part of what they have. None of it is enough, and none of it is going to help the current situation that is happening in places like India. But that's like the reasonable Angela Merkel. Now let's look at the unreasonable part of Angela Merkel. Then she went on to say that if you lift the patent, anyway, this is like her global idea, her ideology. If you lift the patent, it will take away the incentives for pharmaceutical companies to achieve the kinds of results that we need, and it will take the incentive away from making these vaccines. And then she went on to say that it was a mistake that the European Union did not accommodate Big Pharma more than they had, and they already accommodated a great deal, trust me. And that they allowed, those are her actual words, that they allowed India to take up too much of the pharmaceutical market. To be fair to Angela Merkel, I don't think she meant like we allowed as in like we control it. I think when she says allowed, she just means we allowed ourselves in the European Union to fall behind in the global market. I think that's what she means. But the painful side of this is that she says that if you lift the patent, it will take away the incentive from all these different people. That is just total neoliberal propaganda, and also untrue. It's just not true. This ideology of neoliberalism that if you don't incentivize people with like big money, and if you don't incentivize these massive big corporations who are faceless and don't have motivation, they're not persons. Their only motivation is profit. But because they're these like they're profit machines, faceless, personless, they have nothing to do with empathy, nothing to do with humanity. So she's really talking about like if you don't accommodate these corporations, then the corporations will not want to work with you. But to like for her to say it doesn't incentivize people, that's total crap. If that were true, no art, no science, no discovery, no invention ever would have happened in this godforsaken world before capitalism. Surely. That's number one. And number two, there are systems outside of capitalism today, or outside of the kind of capitalism that we deal with in the West, that don't have these types of amazing incentives in healthcare, for example, where the healthcare is superior to what we have in the West, where we're paying a lot of money for it, and we're not really getting the kind of level of healthcare that other people are getting. Cuba is always one good example, and I'm not like a Cuban loving leftist. Like I don't worship Castro or anything like that. I have far more of a balanced view on Cuba, but one thing is for sure, like that healthcare system is one of the best in the world. And the incentive is not profit, and the incentive is not getting ahead, and the incentive is not like about winning at all costs. The incentive is just the art and science of medicine. Really, that's the incentive. You have places like Argentina, where the healthcare system, both private and public, which is incredibly accessible, is excellent. So, again, one of the highest levels in the world. The kind of capitalism that exists in Argentina is kind of nominal. It's a weird system. There's a lot of backdrops from Peronismo in the 20th century. A lot of kind of OG populism, a lot of broken capitalism that was kind of imposed on Argentina by draconian and aggressive shark loans given to it by the United States. It was kind of like one of those offers you couldn't refuse, and now everyone's suffering for it. And despite of all of this, and despite of the fact that that healthcare system doesn't incentivize people with profit. So if you become a surgeon or if you become a doctor, you're never really going to be the kind of rich that you would be in the United Kingdom or America. nevertheless, the doctors are amazing. They're far superior to the just like the practice, the knowledge, the ability is a lot superior to what you will find in Europe, in America, in the United Kingdom. How is that possible, Angela Merkel? Like how? Like I cannot think of any reason why people would be good at their jobs other than horrible, like immediate, aggressive profit. There is something to the human spirit. There are people who are just educated in a different way, who have a different worldview, and maybe they do something because they truly love it. And the paradox of some places like Argentina is that when you take like the big, amazingly big profit, I'm not saying like every doctor is super poor in Argentina, that's not true either. They're like middle class professionals. But it's nothing compared to the kind of money-making scams that healthcare systems do in Euro-America, right? They're not incentivized by money in the same way, or status or power, and yet they're better practitioners, they're better at their jobs somehow. There must be a different incentive in place, right? There must be some kind of a motivation here that is driving these people's ability and their professionalism. Could it possibly be, I mean, I'm just like saying that off the top of my head, but could it possibly be the fact that when you take the money out of medical care, that maybe then that takes away the bad incentives and it allows people to focus on their actual jobs, and it allows to filter in the kind of people who care about patients, about people, about lives, and who want to help people and save lives. And they're not in it for the money, they're in it for the mission because they love it. I mean, that's just like this kooky left idea, but I guess it works in some places in the world. I don't know, maybe Europe's special. Merkel really, like, this is mask off. And I mean, like, she's always been like this, but it's just like this, like, she has this, like, machine-like, slightly phlegmatic, kind of slow pace, you know, getting to that neoliberal goal kind of aura to her. And she, like, she's in this meeting about, like, waiving the patent, and, like, you know, like, there's people in India, like, they're burning bodies on the streets. Like, there's, like, rows of bodies burning on the streets. There's so many people dying, there's not enough space to, like, organize a funeral. And she's worried about, like, whether, like, we can incentivize Big Pharma. Like, how can we get Big Pharma to invest more in Germany and in Europe? This is all wrong. Like, the system is wrong. It's an ideology. It's a propaganda. This is not how you incentivize people. This is not how it works. And this is not like a leftist dream. It's not like a fantasy of, like, a better world that could be, but it's not, like, doable. Because it's being done in all these different countries right now. Countries that Western powers, Western imperialist powers, have screwed time and time again to try and take away their ability to make themselves independent of them, to make themselves thrive, to allow them to self-govern. And yet, despite of all of this, all this difficulty, all the coups and the military regimes of the 20th century, countries like Argentina still managed to thrive in areas that are basic human right areas. In areas that we should not have to fight for, in places like Europe, in places where we shouldn't have to, like, have these discussions. Big Pharma is so corrupt from top to bottom on so many different levels, from the types of drugs they manufacture, to the types of testing they do and how bad the testing is, how corrupt different systems like the FDA are around the world when they approve these drugs. A lot of these drugs are used and abused on a variety of different client groups and patients, including underage kids. The constant pushing of drugs, and I'm not like an anti-drug person, like for everyone, but I think there's certain types of pharmaceuticals that are just constantly pushed just because they've been produced and they have to do something with them. And there's like case after case after case of lawsuits against people like AstraZeneca for pushing the wrong drugs on people, for pushing anti-depression drugs on people who don't need them, for not doing their testing properly so that nobody really knows how the drugs work. A lot of psychoactive drugs are pushed on the general population with dire consequences. A lot of other types of drugs too. And I'm someone I take drugs every day. They're like life preserving drugs in a sense. I wouldn't be able to have any kind of a quality of life with the drugs without the drugs that I take. I need them. So I'm very appreciative of the kinds of advances that science and medicine can make. That does not detract from the fact that the practices of these big pharma companies are dirty practices. They exploit people, again, they exploit people in different countries. They exploit subsidies they get from big Western powers, not to mention the tax cuts, the tax breaks, and all the other practices that come into this. The lobbying practices in medicine, in Medicare, the way that pharmaceutical companies routinely bribe and get on board doctors in the private and public sector to push their drugs, the way they market their drugs. All of those things, the pricing, everything, it's just corruption after corruption upon corruption. These companies have too much power, and they do not have our best interests at heart, and they're not driven. And this is the whole point that Angela is making. They need to be making these millions, because if they don't make these millions, then they won't innovate. No, actually, it's kind of the opposite. They don't innovate because they make millions, because their incentive is profit, and if the incentive is profit, they focus on things that are a quick buck. They focus on things that are easy to test and hard to falsify. Like, for example, psychoactive drugs. A lot of the psychological medical industry, the biopsychological industry. Is prefaced on a lot of really bad research. There's so little we know about the human brain, really. A lot of it is conjecture. But if you build up enough hype, you can sell a lot of things. And why is that? Because a lot of people in our world today are unhappy, lonely, and they feel dejected and left behind. And instead of actually pushing for social change, instead of giving people the space to talk and change the world, we tell them that there's something wrong with them, and that they need a pill that then they pay for. And so the cycle continues. This is just one example of the ways that pharma abuses things. But there's other things. There's certain conditions that big pharma has the money to test drugs for, but they don't test the drugs for these conditions because they don't think in their a cost-profit analysis, they don't deem those drugs to be valuable enough. So a lot of people have a lower quality of life. One example, I can give you an example from my life. I'm celiac. There's no drugs, there's no big pharma incentive to help celiacs. Celiacs have an intolerance to gluten, so they can't eat wheat, and it's it can get really serious over time. But because there's already a cure, there's a cure for this disease, you just don't eat you don't eat the wheat, right? So there's no incentive for big pharma to develop any kind of drugs or better testing for this disease, which affects a lot of people, and it goes undiagnosed a lot for a very long period of time. But they're not incentivized to do these tests because it's a small amount of the population, and it's not going to bring a lot of profit, because a lot of these people like me, we have a choice. I could take a pill if they had a pill, or I could just have a diet that suited my needs as a person with this condition. So they don't invest in it. And I'm not particularly bitter about it. I'd rather not take the pill. But it's just one example of the way that a profit-motivated machine like Big Pharma is never going to give us the kind of innovation and the kind of forward creative thinking that we need in the biomedical industries today, especially with the kind of knowledge we have, with the kind of testing, the increased understanding of genes, of heritage, of the different types of factors that go into predicting what kinds of conditions some people might have. We have all this. We can do 23andMe, but we can't develop very basic drugs for some chronic diseases. No, that's not true. We just develop the types of drugs that we can make a lot of money from, and we can do that over a long period of time, and we can market it to a large population. Like, for example, Big Pharma that works in psychology, where it's a large population. A lot of people are unhappy. We can sell them a lot of drugs and make them feel better, or not. Sometimes not. Sometimes maybe we can make them just addicted. And that's just as good, because it's all about the profit. It's not about the people. But if you took the money away from Big Pharma, then the incentive would be the well-being of people and innovation and the improvement of the human condition. But no, Angela Merkel begs to differ. She wants more. She wants more Big Pharma. She wants more breaks for Big Pharma. And she wants to give more power to Big Pharma in Germany and beyond in the European Union. What a letdown. You know, people like Pasteur, with penicillin, he wasn't, this was not like an apparatchik working in some corporation and he was motivated because like his boss had like goals for that quarter. That's not what motivated Pasteur, and that's not how science and innovation happens at all. But we're sucking, we have for the last 20 years sucked all the innovation and all of the creativity and all the air out of the arts and sciences. And it's insulting to say that no one would do anything. No one would ever have one single interesting and new thought if we didn't have these financial incentives, and only those, and only through the corporate system. Appalling. Appalling. Thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it so much. Wherever you are, whoever you are, until I see you again, take care of yourself and stay safe out there.